There's so much going on in America that we thought we had to check in with Sherwin. US President Donald Trump says he will name a new UN ambassador in the coming weeks. Nikki Haley abruptly announced that she's resigning at the end of the year in the latest shake-up for Donald Trump's turbulent administration. Meanwhile, Brett Kavanaugh finally took his seat on the country's Supreme Court with sexual assault claims unresolved. To discuss, we're joined by US correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Thanks for being with us, Sherwin. A lot of speculation. He's not on the screen for us, but Sherwin on the line. A lot of speculation around who will be the next UN ambassador, rather. Who are the names in the hat?
I loved how you deflected the news flow to the United States, Francis. I'm sure there's a lot going on in South Africa as well. But to answer your question, we were hearing the word Dina Powell. Dina Powell is a Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategy currently within the White House on the President's National Security Council. We understand that she also served as a assistant to the President in the past, a senior counselor for economic initiatives, and she has also served as a managing director and partner at Goldman Sachs before her tenure in this White House. And prior to that, she also served as an advisor to former President George W. Bush. So clearly this is someone that is within the White House currently. We understand that she was born in Cairo. She speaks Arab fluently, which will set her up certainly very well in terms of one of the 6 official languages here at the United Nations. But the President speaking to reporters a short time ago, Francis, really just saying that they're looking at a number of people, but Dina Powell certainly a strong contender for the replacement of Nikki Haley. And remember, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations is a cabinet-level position. So she will need to be confirmed by the Senate. She will go through the rigmarole of trying to convince a majority of senators in terms of her nomination. And let's not forget that Nikki Haley was confirmed by a vast majority of 96-4 in the 100 Senate. So certainly a high bar for Dina Powell to scale if indeed she becomes the nominee.
So, Sherwin, you're so wrong, because we are so jealous of your gig here. You get to watch historic speeches in the US, in the UN, to be up close and personal with very important people, although some would say that's what happens in the UN, a lot of speeches. So tell us, how important is this UN ambassador post to sort of get America's message out, if nothing else?
Okay, so it's a cabinet-level position, right? So she sits in the President, or he would sit in the President's National Security Council. In addition, the United Nations is in the United States. So, you are therefore the link to the host government, in a sense, as the United States ambassador. And in addition to that, Francis, the United States remains the largest financial supporter of the United Nations, both in terms of the general budget and the peacekeeping budget. So when you hold the purse strings to an organization like this, you become an important factor not only to the United Nations, but certainly in terms of the relationship between the host country and the United Nations. In addition to that, the United States still has the veto, along with 4 other permanent members of the Security Council. And when they deploy that veto, particularly on issues as it might regard Israel and the Palestinian issue, which is where we've seen that veto deployed, they certainly become a very central figure in the United States geopolitical narrative. So it's a very, very important role: purse strings, veto, and host government.
And look, some say there was maybe some bad blood between her and Trump, but Nikki Haley got off with her reputation intact, with well wishes from US President Donald Trump. Very unusual. How did this all happen?
Well, some would say, Francis, that you should never underestimate the political press corps in Washington. And Nikki Haley was able to escape the clutches, or certainly the peering of those eyes, if you will, if she were to have been based in Washington and surrounded the president on a daily basis. So her proximity to this administration, being based here in New York and not in the capital, certainly gave her the leverage to create some of that distance. She was also very efficient. Nikki Haley replaced a very hard-working a very hard-working United States ambassador as her predecessor in the Obama administration, Samantha Power, who wasn't necessarily the best administrator. Certainly, if you talk to some of her staff, belatedly so. Nikki Haley had a great warmth, southern charm to her. She was very much a people's person. So you heard, we spoke to a number of ambassadors yesterday about her sudden resignation, and they were unequivocal that though they disagreed with her on policy, she was very effective in her role, and they were friends. They were friends. The Bolivian ambassador, whose president has fundamental disagreements with the U.S. administration, said, Nikki's my friend. Yes, we disagreed on the policy issues, but at the end of the day, we could sit around a table and have dinner and maybe toast over dessert.
Yeah.
So essentially, she had a very good personality. She was very warmly received here in New York, and I think the proximity, the distance that just being based in New York gave her in terms of her proximity to the White House certainly has aided her in the long run.
All right, so very interesting. And let's look at another friend of U.S. President Donald Trump, Brett Kavanaugh. There's been so much furore around the sexual assault claims. Now that he's been sworn in, has that died down?
Well, Americans, like I'm sure
our base is fired up. We finally discovered the one thing that would fire up the Republican base, and we didn't think of it. The other side did it. The tactics that have been employed both by Judiciary Committee.
All right, Sherwin, we're bringing in a clip a little bit early. Carry on about Brett Kavanaugh, and then we'll go to these senators talking.
Apologies, I heard Mitch McConnell in my ear, so I thought you might be playing that. The point I was trying to make is that the attention span of Americans in this country tends to move along pretty quickly. We have a Hurricane Michael, a Category 4 storm that is barreling up the panhandle of Florida in the Gulf of Mexico. You had the resignation of Nikki Haley. But this is going to be an issue moving forward. We are about a few weeks out from a midterm election yet. So while we don't see the hundreds of impromptu protesters gathered on the steps of the Supreme Court in Washington, as we did over this weekend, given the confirmation vote of Brett Kavanaugh, that element has perhaps died down for now. But we will probably see this as this issue raise its head again as we move closer to the November 6th midterm elections.
And what are those senators saying? Maybe you can cue us now to what they're saying, because you would think this would galvanize Democrats, but people are saying this could galvanize Republicans.
Well, there's some new polling out today, Francis. Let me just look at this. The Politico Morning Consult poll says that in the poll was conducted entirely after last week's vote, 46% of voters in the Senate believe that the Senate made the wrong decision, while 40% of the general voting public said that it was the right decision. So 46%, there's a 6% percentage point advantage there to Democrats. And following the GOP-led effort to push through these nominations, enthusiasm among Democratic voters has surged even further. And don't forget that comes on the back of the fact that Democrats were enthused anyway, given their resistance to the Trump presidency. But let's listen to some of the two key senators, both from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, in terms of just how galvanized their bases are heading into November 6th.
Our base is fired up. We finally discovered the one thing that would fire up the Republican base, and we didn't think of it. The other side did it. The tactics that have been employed both by Judiciary Committee, Democratic senators, and by the virtual mob that's assaulted all of us in the course of this process has turned our base on fire. I was talking to two of my political advisors yesterday about the advantage that these guys, by their tactics, have given to us going into these red state competitive races. And we're pretty excited. They managed to deliver the only thing we had not been able to figure out how to do, which was to get our folks fired up. The other side is obviously fired up. They have been all year.
If you believe the process here in the Senate was a sham, and you believe Americans deserve better, vote. If you believe that Supreme Court justices should conform to the highest standards of character, impartiality, temperament, and above all, honesty and credibility, vote. I understand. I share the deep anguish that millions of Americans are experiencing today. But I say to you, my fellow Americans, there is one answer. Vote.
Sure, so Sherwin, your poll was so interesting. I guess.
There you have it.
Yeah. Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the poll. I mean, so there is a sense, certainly from Republicans, that the Kavanaugh issue, the presumption of innocence, that factor will galvanize some of their supporters. We're seeing polling that also speaks to independents not liking quite the tactics the Democrats employed. But I don't think that discounts the blue wave that we've been talking about for a number of months now. People are energized because they do not like this president. And added to that, the confirmation at a very slim margin of 50 votes to 48 has galvanized and enthused them even more to turn out to the polls. It's going to be very interesting. It comes down to a numbers game, Francis, and those numbers will only be known at the end of voting day on November 6th.
All right, so Democrats fired up, Republicans fired up, women fired up. Thank you very much for that update, our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. All right, we take a short break because sporting action coming up.